Today, we're talking about heat maps. Now, here's the thing. During March, we are covering everything to do with user behavior. So in January, we focused on customer research. In February, we focused on persuasion and psychology. And this month, we're focusing on how to analyze your users, how to understand user behavior so that you can use that insight and increase conversions. And we spoke about many different things. So last week, we did heuristic analysis. Today, we're talking about heat maps. Next week, we have a guest, Dana DiTomaso, who is amazing, and she's going to be talking about Google Analytics. She's actually going to show us how she analyzes a landing page in less than an hour. It's going to be super awesome, and we're going to get all sorts of cool stuff from that. Then we have a session coming up on Google Tag Manager. So all that good stuff. But today we're focusing on heat maps. And heat maps are actually a very important subject to me because I use them with every client and every one of our students when we work on optimizing their websites. So we're going to dive into all the important stuff, like first, of course, what is a heat map, why you need it, the types of heat maps that you can use. We're going to be talking about the different insights that you can get from heat maps, and most importantly, what to look out for. I recently, well, maybe not recently, like a year ago, had a conversation with Dr. David Darman, who is Hotjar's CEO. He's a very good friend of mine, and we talked about the dangers of heat maps, and there are so many, and you could actually be making some of these mistakes. So we'll also discuss those and see how you can get the most out of heat maps. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now, and let's get started. Gonna stop my video, and we're gonna hit share. Who even knows what's going on here? Ah, there we are. This needs to go, whoa, Zoom. Okay, awesome. So I think we can get started. I do have chat open, but I might not be able to see your questions or your replies, so Sophia's in there if you need anything. Okay, so we're talking about how to use heat maps to analyze your website. And heat maps are a very big thing because at the end of the day, they are a great tool to analyze our website and especially user behavior. However, you do have to approach them with caution. Oops, there you go. You do have to approach them with caution because you can make various mistakes. So just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, let's define what a heat map is. So a heat map is a visual representation of behavioral data. Its goal is to visualize how people engage with a certain page on your website, what they click on, how much they scroll, and what actions they take. So we use heat maps to uncover usability issues, UX problems, see how people behave on certain pages, and find frictions. Pain points that are preventing people from performing certain actions on your page. So you can use heat maps for various things, but they're really, really cool when used correctly. And I want to quickly review the types of heat maps that we have. So number one is probably the most well-known heat map, and that's clicks and taps. And I say taps because obviously we're also dealing with mobile. So clicks and tap heat maps are maps that show you where visitors are clicking on your page. They commonly look like the one you can see here in front of you. The red dots indicate an element on the page that is most clicked, and basically the color gets lighter as it records less clicks. So let me use my mouse here. Over here is the one that's being clicked the most. I think that's their blog on Hotjar. But you'll notice that as less clicks appear, we have less color on them. So that's how you know what are the most clicked action items, call to action buttons, and elements on your page. Now, click maps can be used to identify issues like people clicking on items that aren't clickable, or elements you're not really interested in people clicking on and people are clicking on. So ultimately, you'll want to see the most clicks on your call to action button. However, you can learn a lot from other elements that people are clicking on. So you can learn intent and interest. So if people are clicking on a certain headline or stuff like that, then you'll also get into that. But we'll elaborate on this in just a moment. But essentially, these are clicks and tap heat maps. The second one is scroll maps. So scroll maps are, just as they sound, a visual representation of the scroll depth on your page. They track how far people scrolled on your page and can give you a good indication of where people abandon your page, if the content on your page is laid out correctly, if it requires revisiting, optimizing, if there is something wrong. It's a really cool thing to use. Again, it's always in context. So I just put in a screenshot of my scroll map from my homepage, and you'll see it says 75% of people reach here, but the fold is over here. So it doesn't really make much sense. But again, you have to have quite a lot of numbers in there and a very long page. My homepage is quite short. Let's move on to the third type of heat map, and that is engagement and movement heat maps. Now, actually, I am a huge fan of these type of heat maps, because engagement heat maps, which by the way are sometimes referred to as hover maps, show you how people move their mouse or their finger across the screen. So these type of maps give you a good indication of the way people take in your content. So I don't know about you, but when I kind of read stuff, I tend to highlight different words, sentences, and read that way. I don't know why I do it, but it's just ingrained in me. However, the primary issue with these kind of maps is that someone hovering over a certain element on the page doesn't necessarily mean they're looking at it. So you have to remember that these types of maps aren't 100% reliable. So when you think about it, like you might be hovering over, I don't know, this element over here, but your eyes are somewhere else. So you do have to use it with something else. So according to Google, there's a 64% correlation between what you may see in a movement heat map and what actually eye movement looks like. So that's why you always want to correlate with the next type of map, which is eye tracking. So this type of map is a little more advanced, and it normally requires people come into a sort of a lab or an office, or maybe it's done online and they wear special goggles or glasses to be analyzed. It can also be done via a webcam, which is what most people are doing now. But this type of heat map tracks eye movements and shows you how people look at your page. I think it's fascinating. They can show you what people look at during a certain time frame. So it can show you within 3 seconds, these are the main elements that people look at. With 10 seconds or when they're 30 seconds on the page, they're looking at this. So these type of maps are very helpful in identifying fixation on certain elements, showing you the parts of your page that have highest fixation points and how long people looked at a certain element. So basically helping you understand if perhaps something is too complicated or requires a lot of cognitive intake. There's all sorts of things like that. But I'm always collaborating and comparing different maps together, and it really helps understand different things. What's interesting here, by the way, is that it's quite well known that the left-hand side of a website, of a page, is a blind spot, and you can clearly see in this heat map that most people don't even see it. So when people add banners, pop-ups, calls to action on the left side of the page or the right side of the page, they tend to be ignored. Okay. And the last type of a heat map, which to be honest isn't a heat map, but it's part of the world of heat maps, is screen recordings. So screen recordings aren't really heat maps, as I said, but I'd like to touch on them briefly because they help you understand how people interact with your website. You can actively see how people used your site, what actions they performed, where they clicked on, and sometimes even identify hesitations or concerns. It's really, really cool. But one thing to know about screen recordings is that you shouldn't go into them blindly and just watch them, because it creates basically certain pages. What you need to do is come in and ask certain questions on pages. So you want to come into screen recordings with a certain user behavior question. So for example, you see that most people aren't clicking on this element, but instead they're clicking on something else via heat maps. So you'll go via click heat map. So you'll go into a session recording and you'll look and see, okay, what is actually happening? So you come with a specific question, like I have an hypothesis that people get stuck on this stage of the funnel because of a particular action. And then you watch a few recordings to see if this is actually what's going on. So if you come in blindly to recordings, you're going to spend a whole day or two just reviewing recordings and not really knowing what to look at. There's all sorts of biases and stuff. So make sure that if you are going to use screen recordings, that you come in with some practical questions you want answers to. Okay, so let's talk about heat map biases. So I mentioned that I spoke to David last year. So he said, and this is the funniest quote, so the biggest challenge people face is that if you don't know what you're looking for in your heat maps, you're basically screwed because you're literally looking for a needle in a haystack. So as I discussed with David a while ago, heat maps look great on paper, but they can be very deceiving. If you go in blindly, set up some maps and hope for some insights, you might get them, but you could also lose focus. You can fall into subjectivity of your opinion, or you could get lost in all that data. And this is with any of the 5 types of maps that I spoke about. And this is why it's so important to use heat maps as part of your research process and not as your only tool. I've seen countless companies use heat maps blindly and end up applying their own biases and feelings to the analysis of their heat maps, which makes sense. We have different, we come in with our different opinions and ideas, and we think we know something, so we apply it to what we're seeing. So to avoid these biases and misinterpretations of the data, here's how to use a heat map correctly and gain meaningful results. So number 1, I would start by analyzing Google Analytics. So this is the process that I use when I'm analyzing a heat map. So where do heat maps actually fit in with my customer research? So number 1, I find pain points within my funnel. I find the leaks, I find problematic pages, I locate different pages that need optimization. Then I start asking questions. So related questions could be, are people given all the relevant information that they need to make a decision on this page? Or is the call to action button relevant? Can it be seen easily? All these type of questions that are something that I would like answers to. So I'm making a list of different questions that will help me better understand why this problem is happening on a page. Then I'm going to set up a heat map. So then I will go into Hotjar, because that's a tool that I use, but there are many, many other tools. You can use Lucky Orange, you can use Clicktail, you can use crazyegg. There's so many different ones. I just use Hotjar, but you can set up a heat map on the page and screen recordings. So when you have those questions, when you know what pages are the problematic pages, so let's just say that the problematic page is our homepage, just as an example, and I've asked some relevant questions, I've written down some questions that I want answers to, then I'm going to go into Hotjar and set up that heat map and screen recording. Then I'm going to analyze the heat maps according to the questions that I asked. Then I'm going to compare it to other research. So surveys, polls, Google Analytics data, interviews, user testing, all of that good stuff. Everything that we've done over the past few weeks, does it correlate? So what I'm seeing in the heat map, does it correlate with what I've seen in other parts of my research? So this is my go-to process when I'm using heat maps, never in silo and always as part of the bigger picture. Now, I'd like to talk to you about the kind of insights that you can get from each heat map. So let's talk about meaningful insights from heat maps. Are people clicking on elements that aren't clickable? So these are insights that are cool. Now, this is an old client of mine. I think I worked with them almost 5 years ago, and they were such an amazing company to work with. And here's an interesting thing. We set a heat map on their homepage, and this is what we saw. So if you ignore the arrow on the top and just look at these, you'll notice very interesting things. People were clicking on these elements. Now that makes sense, right? Oops, sorry, that makes sense. And we think it makes sense, but it doesn't actually make sense because these items aren't clickable. They were just bullet points. But unfortunately, they were designed in a way that made people think that these were buttons. So people were clicking on them. So this is a cool insight to get from a heat map, because then you know something in this design needs to change. If people think that these elements are clickable, then there's two things that I get from this. One is that I need to change the design so they don't think they're clickable. And two, I need to review what these items are that people are clicking on, because apparently this is what people want to reach. This is where people want to go. So it's a great insight to get from a heat map. Another thing you can do is get a better understanding of the path people take. Now, we're definitely going to discuss Google Analytics next week, much more in depth. But just to touch on it for a second, and even if you're just getting started with Google Analytics and you don't have much experience, this is a really easy thing to do. So if you notice that a certain page, that a lot of people are clicking on a certain button on your page, you can actually go back to Google Analytics and go to Behavior, Site Content, All Pages, and click on Destination URL. And basically what you do is you open it up, and you open up the navigation summary of that URL, and it will show you where people came from and where they went to after clicking on that link. So it's actually really, really cool. So we went to Get Started page, and you can see where people came from to get to that page and where they went to. And this is really cool because you can analyze people's behavior. So if you're noticing on a heat map that people are clicking on something specific, and it might not be your call to action. So there's another button there that people are constantly clicking on. You might want to understand, okay, so where do people go after they click on this button? Where are they going to? What are they doing? So this is just a really cool thing you can do and get really cool insights about the path that people take on your website. Next, we have locating the most clickable links. So you can find, so if you notice that most clicks are happening on the bottom of the page, for example, so you look at your heat map and you notice that hardly anyone is clicking on the top of your page, but most of the people are clicking on the bottom of the page. So that may indicate that the information people want is actually too far below, and you can test moving that content higher on the page to see if it converts. So for example, in this heat map, you can see that more people click on the play button and navigation buttons below the fold than the one above it. And then I went to look at this page live and found out that the first image isn't even a button, but it looks like one. So we now have two very interesting insights. One is that people are clicking on something that isn't clickable, these people. And two is that even though it looks clickable, and it really does look clickable, most people click on the bottom video, on the link below. So that means that in order for them to watch the video, they actually need this information, more information. So it's a really cool way to analyze a heat map. Let me see if I'm missing any questions. Can you quickly repeat how to get to the page paths? Thank you, Liz. Liz. So yes, that is the way to get to it. Okay, another thing you can do is identify the content people are mostly interested in. So you can use the attention map, remember the hover map, to see which part of a page has been viewed the most. You can locate parts of the page that are getting the most engagement. And this will further help you understand what content is engaging, what people care about, and what content you should be highlighting on the page. So in this example in front of you, people spend a lot of time hovering over the testimonial and the bullet points. So in this case, we could test having the testimonial higher on the page, because this is kind of middle of the page. People also seem to be hovering over the logo in the top left corner, which is this over here. So in this case, I'd go into Google Analytics and check for bounce rate, and see if the path, and also look at the path that people take and look at a click map, all to basically understand if many people leave the page, if they don't find it relevant, or if there's something that's missing in terms of content. So I really do like engagement maps. Again, as I mentioned, you have to use them with other maps and data, but it's a cool way to just see how people are interacting with your page and what they're reading and what they're interested in. So over here, there's a number. So most people kind of hovered over here. A lot of people are hovering over this logo, which isn't actually a logo, trust symbol. And it's just interesting behavior. Another thing you can do is basically find out where you're losing visitor attention. So scroll maps can help you locate big drop-offs on a page. So essentially, you'll see suddenly it goes from red to yellow, and then suddenly it's completely dark. That means that people completely drop off from your page. Or you might see something really weird where it's red at the top, no colors in the middle, and it goes back to colors at the bottom. So there's all sorts of weird things that can happen with scroll maps, but it's really interesting to see where, I mean, it could mean two things. It could mean either that the content wasn't relevant, so I left the page, or it could mean I got everything that I needed, all the information that I needed, and it was enough, so I moved on to the next page. In this example over here, you can see that most people get to this part of the page, but they don't visit these other products. So it's just a way for you to know that if you wanted to highlight these products, if these were the ones that you wanted to sell, then you might want to switch around a few things. But again, what I would do is go into Google Analytics and see actual sales for each one of these items, and then compare and see what makes sense. If it's a regular page and not an e-commerce site, so if it's a landing page and you see something like this, you'll want to check the conversion rate of that landing page and see, is it does it have a high conversion rate? So is it just because people reached this part of the page and said, okay, we're convinced, let's just convert, or is it because people didn't find what they were looking for and they left? So kind of always correlating and looking for things that work together. Last but not least is see how visitors interact with specific elements. So these are screen recordings, and as I mentioned at the beginning, you want to approach these recordings with specific questions in mind. So for example, what are the biggest points of friction on the page? How do people fill out forms? What actions are people unable to complete? You'll notice how fast people skim through your content, which is really cool. So if you want to see how fast people are scrolling, where they pause, what interests them, it really is cool. Now note that this takes at least half a day, if not more. So come planned and focused at the task in hand. Because again, screen recordings are huge. They can be really, really problematic. So you want to make sure that you are coming in with these specific questions. In this example over here, you can just see how people use the navigation bar, which is cool. They clicked on product and then they went to a specific drop-down menu item. So they skipped all that stuff. And you can see those lines are what tell you what people are doing, and you can actually hear mouse clicks, and you can see all that really cool thing. So it is a great thing to do, but again, as I mentioned, always use heat maps and other types of of scroll maps and engagement maps and eye tracking specifically, and also recordings together with data. So as I said, first go into Google Analytics and try and find those pages that are problematic, ask those critical questions to figure out what is causing this issue, and only then set up heat maps that can answer those questions for you. Now, in terms of tools, if you're asking, I think I mentioned already that I myself use Hotjar, but I also use Lucky Orange in the past, which I really like. They're fantastic, and they have really good heat maps. I've also used Clicktail, and also I have used crazyegg. So each one of them has pros and cons. It really just depends on what you're looking for and what type of stuff you use it for. The reason I use Hotjar is because it also has polls and surveys and other options that you can use. So it's an all-rounded tool for me. And as I mentioned, they're good friends, so there's also that. Okay, so as I mentioned, our workshops are highly actionable, and I try to be as short as possible too, so that you can get the most out of them. So this actually includes everything we have to talk about today with heat maps, which is what they are, how you can use them, the different insights you can use, the different insights you can get from heat maps, how to use them within all your customer research, and what to look for. So this is what I wanted to cover today. And I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to me, and of course joining me with all these issues that we had with time zones. Let me quickly stop my sharing, come back on video, and see if we have any questions that need answering. Hold on. Hey, I'm back. Let me open up chat. Okay, so we have Chuck. Are you a fan of imagery at the top of the page? The previous slide had nearly all activity in the bottom 50%. I see so many pages with large images that are scenic but don't sell, and I'm not sold on imagery. Are you? Chuck, can you clarify which slide that was, just so I'm 100% sure that I know what you're talking about, what you're referring to? Here's the thing. I think that images, and I love these questions because we're definitely going to have a whole session later on in the year just about using persuasive images. But the goal of an image isn't to just show your product or your service. It's not there to say, this is a teapot. That's not the point. Images and colors are the thing that people see the most. It's the number one thing that people see when they land on your page, and that's what's going to grab their attention. So you want to actually use the images that you have on your website as strategic images. So it's not just to feature the product that you're selling, but also to create a feeling. So if you want people to feel a certain way, you want to use your images to portray that too, so that when people land on your page, they can feel that emotion. We'll use words as in copy to make people feel that way also, but the image has to support that strategic emotion. So I understand when you say that you don't like the large images that are scenic and all these Shutterstock images, essentially, that people use. And I agree. I don't think that there's any reason to use those, but if you can find images that are strategic, that don't necessarily feature the product or the service, but create a feeling and support your strategy of the page. And I highly recommend doing that and not just featuring and showing your product, because it can be a very important way to boost conversions. So the image always has to support everything else. Okay, Liz says, if you notice pages with low clicks or scrolls in heat maps and want to test new elements or copy, how long should you run the test? 1 week or wait for 2,000 visits? Okay, so it really depends on the tool that you're using. I guess you're talking about Hotjar, because Hotjar has 1,000, 2,000, and 10,000 visits as an option for recording. But my go-to is 2,000 normally if I can't go for more. I try, it also depends on how deep the problem is and how fast I want to get to data. I prefer to have at least 2,000. 1,000 to me isn't enough, and it also it's just kind of sampling people throughout the day and not really taking a look at the whole thing. So I would go for as many page views as you can. You shouldn't base your entire strategy on heat maps, so you shouldn't be in a rush to get those results. You can set up a heat map for 2,000 or 10,000 views and just wait a couple of weeks to get that data. Of course, if you don't have that traffic, so if you're not getting 10,000 people a month to your website, there's no reason to put, to set it to 10,000. So it just depends on the amount of visits that you have and when you want to get to results. But I would take the time to just give the heat map time to complete and finish and give you those data points. If you're not seeing any clicks, then that would mean that either the page has a very high bounce rate, or that it's, people aren't really convinced. Maybe you're not, maybe a lot of the people that you sampled didn't do anything, but other people are. So I'd always go into Google Analytics and kind of compare that and see what you're seeing on that page too. Are people moving down the funnel? Where are they going to? What are they doing? So just to kind of correlate and make sure that the data that you're seeing makes sense. Okay. Camille found her way in Google Analytics, which is awesome. Hunter says, do you have any benchmarks or data for scroll depth and CTA placement? For instance, do you want to make sure your CTA is above the 50% drop-off line in the scroll depth heat map? I wouldn't look at it that way. It is a very good question. Here's what I would want to see. If I'm seeing that there's a 50% drop off in a certain part of the page, I want to go in and see the conversion of that page, because as I mentioned before, this could indicate that people received enough information and they're ready to convert, and it could mean that they're not getting the information that they need. I wouldn't look at it as where should the call to action button be, because if there's a drop off, it's a content thing. It's not the button. The button can be placed at the bottom of the page and it would still convert. So as an example, my landing page for Emotion Sells for our course, we have two variations of it. One has 5,000 words. You only get to the actual call to action button. I think it's like when you get to 50% of the page, or maybe even 70% of the page. There's no call to action beforehand. But you can still see, people either reaching all the way to the call to action button or people dropping off beforehand. And the reason for that is that it's not to do with the call to action button. People aren't looking for the call to action button. They're reading your content. They're trying to figure out if this makes sense or not. So I know that there's like this rule / best practice where you have to have the call to action above the fold and stuff like that. But I think more importantly, you have to get the message through. You have to understand who you're talking to, what you're saying. Are you mentioning those pain points? Are you mentioning the outcomes, the desired outcomes that people want? And that's where you would place the CTA. So it's more about where it comes in on the page, and it's less to do with scroll depth. If people aren't scrolling, I would look at it more as there's a problem with the content on the page. Now you can look at the clicks on the CTA and see how many people are clicking. You can look at the conversion rate of that page and see what's going on with it. But I wouldn't correlate the two, the CTA and scroll. Hopefully that was understandable, but if not, let me know and I'll try and clarify even more. Vic says the destination URL is in I figure you're explaining to Camille how to get to that report. So, okay, sounds good, awesome, okay, thanks. Yes, not a fan of the must be above the fold approach. Do you have the URL for the course or a blog article with the data from it? I don't have a blog article covering the heat map from my landing page, but we do have a link to our landing page, I think, Sophia, somewhere. The emotion cells landing page is somewhere in there. We'll throw that for you in there so you can see it. Let me see, I have 2 more questions. Albert says, so rule of thumb, do you move hot content, higher up on the page? I don't think there's a rule of thumb ever, unfortunately, because things really change and it depends on the context of what you're answering. For example, if you're seeing certain parts of the page that are getting a ton of clicks, you might figure out that those aren't things you really want people to click on, right? So maybe you don't want to highlight those. And if you're seeing that a lot of the buttons that are being clicked are at the bottom of the page, then yes, maybe you do want to move that up, but it's not just the clicks that matter, it's also the engagement and it's also the scroll depth. So if people stop at a certain page, or if everyone's getting all the way to the bottom of the page, but they are not clicking on the call to action button, then maybe something was lost. So there's no real rule of thumb, but yes, you can tell that when there's certain content, not call to action buttons, but certain content that people are clicking on, they're hovering above, that they're playing with from the screen recordings, or there's all sorts of stuff like that, then I would definitely consider moving that content above the fold and testing it to see if it gets more conversions. Neha says, from your experience, do people click on videos, words, or images more? Which elements capture a visitor's eye, mouse, finger first? And which elements do they move on afterwards? I don't think I can answer that. I mean, in real, with data supporting it, videos are obviously something that call for an action, and a lot of people prefer to click on a video, but it also depends if you're showing the time of a video. So if I'm on a page, and again, this is so subjective, because if I'm on a page and there's a video there, but it shows this video is 2 minutes, I'm not going to click on that video. If it's a 10-second video or a 15-second video or a 30-second video, then that would make me want to click on it more. But it also depends on where it is on the page, the video, the image, the words, the call to action. Everything's about where it is in context. Nothing works alone. So videos don't work alone, copy doesn't work alone, design doesn't work alone, call to action buttons don't work alone. Everything has to support each other and work together. So you're never going to see like, oh, hands down, it's always videos, or hands down, it's always call to action buttons, or copy. So there isn't a rule of thumb on this either, unfortunately. I would constantly think about the context of everything and the placement of all the elements around each other. Hopefully that is helpful, because I know I'm just saying it depends, which is a very annoying answer in conversion optimization. Alexander says, I'm curious to hear your opinion on clarity of value proposition with both copy and image. Your opinion on clarity of value proposition. Alexander, I'm going to need you to unpack that for me and maybe explain the question, because I'm not really sure, but I understand it completely. Terrence says, so a page that has minimal content wouldn't benefit from a heat map. Not really. It depends what you're trying to learn. If you have minimal content, I would ask, why do you have minimal content? And I don't think you should have minimal content. I think I've seen the landing page that you're referring to, and I'm going to be talking about it very soon and telling you that you need to add a ton more content to it. But yes, if you don't have a lot of content on that page, I would definitely consider what type of heat map you want to add to it. And then also if you're going to add a heat map to it to support your hypothesis, then just make sure that you're coming with a list of questions and other data points that you're referring to that the heat map's just going to prove it or disprove what you're trying to say. So don't just come in blindly and say, let's just put a heat map on it and see what happens, but come in with, so I've proven this and this, I've done this research, I've spoken to these people, this is what I think, let's place a heat map and see if that helps too. That's kind of what I would go and do with that. Alexander clarifies, what would you prioritize? Clear visual or copy or both? Which is more important in your opinion? Clear visual that communicates the value prop or clear copy that communicates the value prop? Both together. there's no one or the other. You have to be good at both. When you do voice of customer research, when you are speaking to people, when you're doing interviews, we had a fantastic workshop on that with Nikki a couple of months ago on how to do interviews. So when you do interviews and you're doing surveys, when you reach that value prop and you say, okay, I think this is the value prop that I want to test, everything on the page has to correlate to that and focus on that value prop. If you're only going to use copy to do it, you might get a certain result, but it's not going to be the best result. If you're only using images, you could get a certain result, but not the best result. So just like I was explaining before, everything works together and you should definitely try and correlate it together. Now, I would start with the copy because the copy dictates everything else on the page. So you maybe create a wireframe, because from your customer interviews and your surveys, you now know what people need to see, read, and take in on a page. So let's say this is a landing page. So I'd outline the whole page. I'd understand what is it that I want to say, what's the content hierarchy, what step leads to the next, and then I would introduce the design around it. But the design supports the copy. So everything is supporting that value proposition that you're trying to make. Not everyone has designers. It's not always easy. So you always start anyway with the copy because that's what's going to dictate everything for you. But you have to do the work. You have to do both together. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay, guys, looks like we are out of questions for today and we're hitting the 45-minute mark, which is awesome. So I'm going to sign off for now. As I promised, next week we have Dana Di Tommaso. Guys, you do not want to miss this workshop. It is going to be so cool. Dana's going to walk us through specific reports in Google Analytics. She's going to share a screen. She's going to show us screenshots, and you're going to walk out with exact reports you should be looking at. You could even have your Google Analytics account open while we're talking and review your stuff too. So awesome stuff. Don't miss it. I will see you next week. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend today, or if you're watching it as the recording. I will see you again next Wednesday. Bye.